The evening news on the television ended with the weather forecast. I turned off the sound and remained seated in the leather chair by the fireplace, holding a glass of whiskey. The house seemed too big for one person. 3 years ago, it had been the sound of Elizabeth's laughter, her light footsteps on the marble floor of the hall, the rustle of the newspapers she read at breakfast. Now only the ticking of the antique clock broke the silence. 73 is a respectable age for most people. But I didn't feel like a decrepit old man, as Nicholas had tried to make me feel on my last visit a month ago. My hands were still steady, my memory was clear, and my health allowed me to garden and keep the house in order. It was true that Mrs. Parker's housekeeper came twice a week, but that was more a tradition Elizabeth had established than a necessity. I'd done well at home before. When I was a civil engineer and spent 12 hours a day on sites, the villa in Norton was my life's work. Elizabeth and I bought the property 40 years ago when it was an overgrown vacant lot on the outskirts of town. I designed the house myself, supervised every stage of construction, and chose the materials. The red brick came from Georgia, the oak beams from Oregon. Elizabeth was engaged in interior design, spent hours in antique stores, looking for suitable furniture. The result was a house that magazines called a model of American classical architecture. The sound of a car in the yard made me look up. The headlights illuminated the living room window, then went out. Nicholas had arrived exactly at the appointed time, 8 o'clock in the evening. He'd inherited his punctuality from his mother, who was never a minute late. I finished my whiskey and put the glass on a marble table made by an Italian master. Elizabeth had bought it in Rome on our honeymoon. The doorbell rang twice, short, nervous taps. Typical of my son, always in a hurry to get somewhere, even when there's no hurry. When I was a kid, he used to knock impatiently in my workshop like that, demanding attention. It seemed cute then. Now it was annoying. I opened the solid oak door and saw them on the threshold. Nicholas in a navy blue coat I hadn't seen before, Chelsea under an elegant umbrella, both smiling, strained smiles. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Dad!" Nicholas hugged me, patting me on the back with ostentatious enthusiasm. The hug lasted exactly 3 seconds. No more. "How are you? You look fine." He looked good. Too good for a man who'd been complaining about money problems for the last 6 months. His coat was obviously expensive. His shoes shined like a mirror. The watch on his wrist gleamed gold. "Mr. Lancaster," Chelsea kissed my cheek, leaving a trail of pink lipstick. Her perfume cost more than my monthly pension. "What nasty weather we're having outside. It's a good thing you're at home in the warmth and not outside somewhere." She took off her cloak, revealing a red dress. The silk is of the finest quality. The cut is impeccable. Her job at the ad agency was earning her a good income. But I knew how much creative directors made in their city. It was barely enough for a rented apartment and a used car, not to mention outfits from famous designers. "Come into the dining room." I took their outerwear. Dinner was almost ready. Nicholas's coat was heavy, lined with real fur. The label bore the name of a boutique where such things cost several $1,000s. I wondered where my son got the money to buy something like that. A mid-level manager in a construction company received a maximum of $4,000 a month. After deducting taxes, rent, and other expenses, there was no money left for such clothes. Mrs. Parker prepared fried chicken with vegetables and mashed potatoes in the morning, simple food which I preferred to gourmet dishes with obscure names. Elizabeth always laughed at my cooking habits, called them provincial, but she cooked exactly what I liked and never tried to change my tastes. At the table, Chelsea began to admire the set with the enthusiasm of a professional actor. "This set is amazing. Antique? It must be worth a fortune." 18th century, I arranged the chicken on plates of Chinese porcelain. "I got them from Elizabeth's grandmother. She treasured those plates, never let me use them on weekdays." Nicholas nodded, but I noticed his gaze sliding over the sideboard with the crystal glasses, the paintings on the walls, the silver candlesticks on the sideboard. An appraising look, as if he were estimating the value of each item. An unpleasant sensation, as if a property appraiser had come into the house, not a son. "Dad, have you thought about moving to a place more appropriate for your age?" Chelsea carefully cut off a piece of chicken. With so many rooms in this house, it must be hard to keep track of everything and expensive to maintain. I'm managing for now. I poured myself some water from a crystal pitcher. The house is in excellent condition. That was true. I regularly inspected all the rooms, checked the plumbing, watched the heating. An engineer's habit is to monitor the technical condition of an object. The house did not require serious repairs, only cosmetic updates every few years. Of course, Nicholas agreed hastily, waving his fork. We're just concerned for your safety. At your age, it's better to live where there's constant medical care, social activity, and companionship with your peers. Golden Oaks Nursing Home has gotten great reviews in the local press. Nursing home. My only son thought it was time to send me off to live out my life among strangers who forgot the names of their own children and couldn't tie their shoelaces. I chewed the chicken slowly, pondering his suggestion. Golden Oaks was known for its luxurious accommodations and corresponding prices. I wondered who would pay for my stay there. Nicholas was barely making ends meet, despite his ostentatious luxury. Selling the villa would settle the financial question once and for all. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly, sending a spoonful of mashed potatoes into my mouth. This house is my life. Chelsea and Nicholas looked at each other, a quick glance full of understanding and some kind of secret knowledge. They'd obviously discussed the topic beforehand, rehearsed the dialogue, assigned roles. Nicholas played the caring son, Chelsea the understanding daughter-in-law. We understand your attachment to the family nest. Chelsea placed her hand on my palm. Her fingers were cold despite the warm room. But think practically. What if there was an emergency? A heart attack, a stroke, an accident? The neighbors live far away. The phone might not be available. I have an emergency button. I pointed to the bracelet on my wrist. Modern technology allows you to call for help with one touch. The security system had cost me $1,500, but it provided 24-hour communication with the dispatch service. In the event of an emergency, an ambulance would arrive in 15 minutes. Nicholas wrinkled his nose as if my answer had spoiled his appetite. That doesn't solve the underlying problem, Dad. You live in complete isolation from people. Mom wouldn't want you to exist alone like that. Mentioning Elizabeth was a low blow. My son knew full well how much I missed my wife, how painful it was to lose her every day. But Elizabeth would never make me leave the house we had built together 40 years ago, in which we had invested not only money, but also our souls. Mom would want me to be happy. I set my fork aside and looked at my son carefully. And I'm happy here, among the things we chose together. But you can't live alone until you die. Chelsea leaned closer, her voice softer. Shepidi, you're still a strong, active man. There are a lot of interesting people your age in Golden Oaks. There are women, too. Maybe you'll find a new life partner. A new life partner. I married Elizabeth when I was 25 and had 48 years of cloudless happiness with her. She was the only woman I ever loved with all my soul. The thought of replacing her seemed not only inappropriate, but sacrilegious. You show a touching concern, I said, a poorly concealed irony in my voice. But the decision about my own life is mine. The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence, broken only by the clinking of utensils against china and polite requests for salt or napkins. Nicholas and Chelsea ate intently, occasionally exchanging meaningless remarks about the quality of the food and the homey atmosphere. I watched them trying to figure out what was behind their ostentatious care and intrusive advice. After dessert, an apple pie that Mrs. Parker had baked from Elizabeth's recipe, Nicholas leaned back in his chair and stretched. Papa, we'd like to stay the night. The weather is deteriorating. The road could be dangerous by morning. I glanced out the window. There was no sign of an impending storm, just a normal fall evening in Norton. Of course, I nodded. The guest bedroom is always ready for guests. Chelsea brightened with the enthusiasm of a child receiving a Christmas present. Oh, that's wonderful. It's been so long since I've slept in a real family home. Haven't you, darling? It's a very different atmosphere in our apartment. Nicholas agreed, but his smile seemed strained. They arrived with no bags, no toothbrushes, no pajamas. Either a spontaneous decision or a premeditated move. Given the strange behavior at dinner, the second option seemed more likely. We moved into a spacious living room with high ceilings and molded cornices. I tossed some dry wood into the fireplace and turned up the flames. The flames flickered, casting a warm glow on the polished mahogany furniture. Nicholas sat down on the sofa next to his wife. They looked like a model couple from an infomercial about marital bliss. But something in their postures, their looks, their gestures, made me more and more suspicious. "Tell me about your work," I asked my son, sitting down in my favorite chair. "New projects, career prospects." "Everything is going great." Nicholas reached for the crystal vase with nuts on the coffee table. "I got a long-awaited promotion. Now I supervise the construction of large commercial projects. The salary had almost doubled in the last 6 months. The raise partially explained the expensive clothes and accessories, but only partially. A senior project manager in their company made a maximum of $60,000 a year. Nicholas's suit cost at least $3,000, half a month's salary after taxes. "Congratulations on your success," I nodded. "What about you, Chelsea? How are things going in the advertising business?" "Just fine." She perked up like an actress on stage. "We're working on a major advertising campaign for a luxury hotel chain, a very promising long-term project with international connections." Her enthusiasm seemed as feigned as the smile of an expensive car salesman. Chelsea said the right words, gestured in the right places, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. The professional mask she wore to deal with particularly important clients. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11 with melodious beats. Elizabeth had bought it in Switzerland, and it had kept accurate time for 20 years. "It's late," Nicholas yawned defiantly and stretched. "The workday starts early tomorrow. It's time to rest." I led them to the guest bedroom on the second floor, showing them where the fresh towels and spare blankets were kept. Chelsea admired the 18th century antique furniture. Nicholas thanked me for my hospitality. A perfect family scene if you ignored the small details. My bedroom was at the far end of the hallway, across 3 rooms from the guests. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Elizabeth for nearly half a century, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts swirled around the strange behavior of my son and daughter-in-law. Obsessive talk about the nursing home, appraising glances at antiques, expensive outfits on modest incomes. The pieces of the puzzle didn't add up to a coherent picture, but its contours were becoming clearer and clearer. Something was definitely wrong with this sudden visit. Too much focus on the value of the house, too much insistence on moving, too much fake concern for my loneliness. Nicholas had changed in recent months, more calculating and cold. Chelsea had always been ambitious, but now her ambition had taken on an overtly predatory quality. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my thoughts. Maybe I really am exaggerating the danger of the situation. Perhaps they were genuinely concerned about my well-being and future. But my professional intuition, honed over 30 years of working with complex engineering projects, was telling me that something was definitely wrong, and it was something about my home. I awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The glowing numbers on my alarm clock showed 3 hours and 15 minutes past midnight. Someone was walking through the house trying not to make any noise, but the old floorboards creaked treacherously under the weight of the person. Nicholas had always been a restless child, often waking in the night and wandering the rooms until Elizabeth put him back to bed. Apparently, some of the habits persisted into adulthood. Footsteps drifted toward the stairs. He must have gone down to the kitchen for a glass of water or a snack. There was enough food left in the fridge from dinner. I rolled over onto my other side trying to sleep, but the thoughts kept swarming in my head like pesky flies. There was something about Nicholas and Chelsea's behavior that kept me awake. Their sudden caring seemed insincere, like a poorly learned role in amateur theater. The sounds from downstairs went on longer than necessary for a simple nightcap. Creaking floorboards, the muffled muttering of voices, the quiet clinking of dishes. They were clearly awake. Perhaps they were discussing their impressions of the evening or making plans for tomorrow. Young couples always have something to talk about in private. I got out of bed and walked over to the window. The moon illuminated the backyard where Elizabeth had once planted a rose garden. The bushes looked neglected now. I wasn't much good at gardening without her guidance. Mrs. Parker sometimes pulled weeds, but it wasn't the same. Elizabeth treated the roses like living things, talking to them, knowing the needs of each variety. The house seemed huge in the silence of the night. Empty rooms, unused corners, hallways no one had walked for weeks. After Elizabeth died, I realized how much space loneliness takes up. The house used to be filled with her presence, The sounds of cooking in the kitchen, the rustle of pages of books being turned, the melodies she hummed while doing chores. Now those sounds were only a memory. The voices downstairs had died down. I listened, but all I heard was the ticking of a clock and the distant rumble of a car on the highway. Nicholas and Chelsea had probably gone back to their room. I went back to bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin. The bed was too big for one person. Elizabeth always slept on the right side. I was used to her warm presence beside me. Now the right side of the bed remained cold and empty. The memory of my wife came in waves, especially on these sleepless nights. I remembered her laughter as she read funny stories from the newspaper over breakfast, her habit of adjusting her glasses as she concentrated on solving household problems, the smell of her perfume that lingered in our bedroom for months after the funeral. The grief dulled with time, but it didn't disappear completely. It became part of daily existence, like chronic pain that you gradually get used to. Elizabeth would not have approved of Nicholas's behavior today. She always said that money shouldn't define family relationships. When our son was a teenager and asked to buy him an expensive bicycle, she would explain to him the value of labor and patience. Nicholas had to work part-time during the summer on a construction crew to earn half the cost. He got the bike, but he learned his lesson too. At least that's what I thought at the time. What changed? When did my son turn into someone who values his parents' house as a commodity to sell? As a child, he loved the house, spent hours in my workshop watching me fix broken furniture or assemble shelves. Elizabeth taught him to cook in the kitchen, and he helped her set the table when guests came over. Home was his sanctuary, a place where he felt protected and loved. Maybe the problem is Chelsea. She had come into Nicholas's life 5 years ago when he was 32, a bright, ambitious girl with a good education and big plans for the future. Elizabeth had been wary of her at first, saying Chelsea was too focused on material success, but then she seemed to accept her daughter-in-law as a member of the family. I now realized that my wife's intuition had been correct. Chelsea grew up in a family where money meant too much. Her father worked as a banker, her mother as a realtor in a high-end agency. Conversations at their dinner table revolved around investments, real estate, tax breaks. Love was measured by the size of gifts, success by the numbers in a bank account. Chelsea had absorbed these values from childhood, and now they defined her relationship to the world around her. Nicholas married her after a year of acquaintance. The wedding was luxurious, a white dress for $3,000, a restaurant for 200 guests, an orchestra that played until morning. Chelsea's parents paid for most of the expenses, but I had to contribute a significant amount as well. Elizabeth then said that happiness cannot buy money, but the daughter of the banker thought otherwise. The first years of the marriage were relatively quiet. Nicholas got a promotion at work. Chelsea got a job at an advertising agency. They rented a small apartment in the city center, saving money for their own place. We saw each other on holidays. Sometimes they came over for Sunday lunches. The relationship was cool but polite. Elizabeth tried to find a common language with her sister-in-law, discussed fashion and books with her. Everything changed after Elizabeth's death. Visits became less frequent, conversations shorter. Nicholas formally expressed his condolences, but I sensed that his mother's death didn't hurt him much. He was preoccupied with his own problems, work, career, plans for the future. Grief seemed like an inconvenient obstacle that kept him from moving forward. Chelsea became more assertive about the inheritance. She delicately inquired about my future plans, my health, my financial affairs. The questions were phrased in a caring way, but the point was transparent. She wanted to know when and what she would get when I died. The house in Norton was worth about $1.5 million, plus antiques, plus bank accounts. A solid inheritance for a young couple with ambition. I rolled over onto my left side, trying to find a comfortable position. The mattress was good, orthopedic, but sleeping alone was harder than I expected. Not only because of the empty space next to me, but also because of the absence of the usual rhythm of breathing, the small sounds a sleeping person makes. The silence was pressing on my ears. Footsteps were heard again in the hallway. This time they were heading in my direction. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. Someone stood there listening. Then the doorknob turned gently. The door opened a few centimeters. A faint light from the hallway came through the crack. Someone was peering into my room, checking to see if I was asleep. I lay still, breathing evenly and deeply, mimicking sleep. After a minute, the door closed quietly. Footsteps drifted down the hallway. What was that? Was Nicholas checking on my condition? Or Chelsea, and why? Normal guests don't peek into their host's bedroom in the middle of the night. If they were concerned about my health, they could have just knocked and asked if I was okay. The covert inspection looked suspicious. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I put my ear to the wooden surface, listening to the sounds in the hallway. Whispered voices came from the guest bedroom. Nicholas and Chelsea were talking about something, trying not to wake me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sounded businesslike, like they were discussing important plans. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes, then died down. I went back to bed, but sleep had finally disappeared. My brain was analyzing the events of the evening, looking for logical connections and ulterior motives. Expensive clothes on a modest income, obsessive advice about a nursing home, appreciative glances at antiques, a nightly check of my bedroom. The elements were adding up to a disturbing picture. Perhaps I was being paranoid. Perhaps Nicholas had actually gotten a promotion and could now afford better clothes. Perhaps their concern about my loneliness was genuine. Perhaps the nightly walks around the house were due to simple insomnia, but my intuition told me otherwise. Elizabeth had always said to trust first impressions. When something seems wrong, it usually is. People rarely misjudge character if they don't let their emotions cloud their judgment. My first impression of today's visit was negative. Something about Nicholas and Chelsea's behavior was unsettling. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen my son truly happy, not playing the part of a successful man, but genuinely enjoying life. I couldn't find any such memories. For the past few years, Nicholas had seemed tense, as if he were constantly solving complex problems. Maybe he and Chelsea were having financial difficulties or marital problems. Divorce was expensive these days, especially if the couple couldn't reach an amicable agreement. The clock struck 4 in the morning. Dawn was still a few hours away. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to relax. Tomorrow I had to observe the guests carefully, analyze their behavior, and look for answers to the questions that arose. So far I had only suspicions and vague anxiety. That was not enough for serious conclusions. But one conclusion had already matured definitively. I wasn't going to move into a nursing home, no matter how much Nicholas and Chelsea insisted on it. The house in Norton was my fortress, a place where I felt close to Elizabeth's memory. Here, every room held a piece of our shared life. The living room where we spent New Year's Eve, the kitchen where Elizabeth prepared holiday dinners, the garden we planted together. To give it all up for the dubious comfort of a nursing home would be a betrayal not only of my own feelings, but also of the memory of my wife. If Nicholas and Chelsea expected to get the house after I died, they would have to wait. I was healthy, active, full of energy. There could be another 10 or 15 years of life ahead of me. Perhaps that would be enough time to understand the true motives behind their sudden solicitude. Gradually, the tension let go, and my thoughts became slower and foggier. Fatigue was taking its toll. I fell into a restless sleep, full of strange images and anxious forebodings. I dreamed of a house full of strangers rearranging furniture and hanging pictures on the walls. I dreamed of Elizabeth trying to tell me something, but her voice was drowned in the noise of voices. I dreamed of Nicholas as a little boy, crying and begging me to protect him from something terrible. I woke up with the feeling that something important was slipping from my grasp. Sunlight was streaming through the thick curtains, painting streaks on the carpet. The alarm clock showed 7:30. Time to get up and face the new day, with its problems and revelations. I awoke to the sound of quiet conversation. The voices came from the guest bedroom through the thin wall. The glowing digits of the alarm clock showed 2 hours and 23 minutes past midnight. Nicholas and Chelsea were clearly awake, discussing something important in muffled voices. At first, I could only make out intonations, Chelsea's insistent whispering, Nicholas's uncertain objections. Then the voices became more distinct, as if they'd forgotten the need for silence, or decided I was sleeping soundly enough not to hear them. "We can't wait any longer," Chelsea said. "He's too healthy for his age. He could live another 10 years, maybe more." "But he's my father." Nicholas sounded guilty. "I can't just—" "You can and you should. We've already invested too much in this thing. Loans, debts, obligations. If we don't get the house in the next few months, the bank will take our apartment. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to squeak the floorboards. I walked to the wall that separated my bedroom from the guest bedroom. Old houses have their own peculiarities. The walls were thin, the soundproofing almost non-existent. When I was a kid, Nicholas couldn't keep a single late-night phone call from us. You saw how he reacted to our suggestions today? Chelsea continued. He's never going to move out voluntarily. He's going to cling to this house until his last breath. Maybe we should try talking to him again. Explain our situation? Chelsea snorted. Explain? Tell him we'd spent money we didn't have in hopes of a quick inheritance? That we took out a loan against future real estate? He'd laugh at us. So expensive clothes and ostentatious luxuries were bought on credit. They were living beyond their means, counting on my imminent death. The logic was simple and cruel. An old man cannot live forever, especially after losing his life partner. Many men don't get over the death of a wife for more than a year or two. Nicholas and Chelsea planned to get the inheritance and pay off the debts. But he's healthy, Nicholas still hesitated. His labs are good, his blood pressure's normal. The doctor said he had the heart of a 50-year-old. Health can be compromised, especially at his age. The body becomes vulnerable, any little thing can be fatal. A chill ran down my spine. They were talking about my health like it was an obstacle that needed to be removed. There wasn't an ounce of sympathy or doubt in Chelsea's voice, just cold practicality. What do you suggest? Nicholas asked after a pause. What we've already started. Continue to add the powder to his morning pills. The dosage can be increased. The powder and the pills? They were poisoning me, slowly, methodically, counting on death to look natural. A heart attack or stroke in a 73-year-old man wouldn't surprise anyone. Doctors will attribute it to age and the stress of losing his wife. What if someone suspects? Nicholas's voice was shaking. What if an autopsy is ordered? Who would suspect? You're the only heir, the loving son who took care of your father until his last day. The doctor knows you tried to get him to move into a nursing home. Everyone's going to think you meant well. Chelsea had an elaborate plan. Create an image of caring relatives who care about the old man. Regular visits, safety talks, offers of medical care. If I die at home, everyone will assume my heart has failed because of loneliness and age. How long will that take? Nicholas asked. At the current dosage, 2 to 3 months. If you increase the amount, you can cut the time by half. But then there would be a risk that someone would notice the deterioration. 2 to 3 months to live. They gave me a sentence like a man on death row. I leaned back against the wall, feeling my heart pounding. My hands shook with anger and terror. My only son was planning my murder for money. What if he did agree to move out? Nicholas sounded faintly hopeful. He won't. You saw how he reacted. This house is a sacred place to him. He'd rather die here than leave willingly. That's ironic. Chelsea was right. I'd really rather die in my own home. Not from their poison, but in my own time, from natural causes. Then we'll continue as planned, Nicholas decided. Tomorrow morning, I'll add the usual dose to his blood pressure pills. In a week, we'll increase the amount. And remember, behave as usual. Caring, attentive relatives. No suspicious behavior. I heard the bed creak. They were going to bed. The conversation was over. The plan was set in motion. My son and his wife decided to kill me by slow poisoning. I went back to my bed, but I couldn't lie down. My legs were wobbling. My thoughts were confused. I had to process what I'd heard, make a decision. Should I call the police? But I had no proof other than what I'd overheard. Words against words. Besides, who would believe a 73-year-old man accusing his only son of attempted murder? I went to the window, pulled the curtains open. The moon illuminated the backyard, where stood an old oak tree planted 40 years ago. Nicholas's dog, a cocker spaniel named Rex, was buried under its branches. The boy cried for 3 days, refused to eat. Elizabeth and I took turns comforting him, explaining that death is a natural part of life. What a bitter irony. Now that same boy was planning to hasten my natural death. What turned my son into a killer? Greed? Chelsea's influence? Or just fatigue from waiting for an inheritance? In today's society, the elderly have become a burden to the younger generation. They're kept in nursing homes, visited on holidays, expected to be released from moral obligations. But I was not a burden. I did not demand care, did not ask for money, did not impose with advice. I lived on my own, kept the house in order, didn't cause any trouble. My only fault was being in too good health and not wanting to part with a house that was worth $1.5 million. $1.5 million, a sum you could kill your own father for, a sum that would solve all the financial problems of a young couple, a sum that would turn a loving son into a cold-blooded poisoner. I remembered my morning blood pressure pills. I took them every day at 8 in the morning with a glass of orange juice, a simple habit developed over the years. Nicholas knew about it. He'd seen me taking it several times during his visits. What's more, he bought me pills at the pharmacy when the old ones ran out, a caring son helping his elderly father with his medical needs. Now that caring took on a new meaning. He didn't just buy the medicine, he controlled what I took, adding poison to the capsules, carefully closing them back up. Professional work that left no trace. What kind of powder's that? Something that causes heart or vascular problems? A substance that builds up in the body gradually without raising suspicion? Chelsea clearly had knowledge in this area. She spoke of the dosage with the confidence of an expert. I tried to remember when I'd started feeling worse than usual. For the past few weeks, I'd been feeling unusually tired. I put it down to age and fall malaise. Sometimes I felt dizzy, especially in the morning. The doctor said it was normal for my age and advised me to rest more. Now I understood the real cause of the malaise. The poison was working slowly but surely. A few more months and my body would fail. My heart would stop, or I'd have a stroke. Natural death from old age. What do I do? Stop taking the pills? But that would raise my blood pressure. I did have hypertension. Change the medication to a new one? Nicholas would notice and find a way to add poison to other food or drink. It took time to think about the situation and make the right decision. Time I didn't have much of. 2 to 3 months at the current dosage. A month at the increased dosage. If I acted carelessly, they could speed up the process. I went back to the bed and lay down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I had to pretend I didn't know anything. Act normal. Don't arouse suspicion. Take the poison pills tomorrow morning. Smile at my son and daughter-in-law. Thank them for their concern. Play the role of a trusting old man who doesn't suspect danger. It would be the most difficult role of my life. But there was no other way out yet. Sleep wouldn't come. My brain was feverishly analyzing options. Go to the doctor and ask for a blood test for toxins? But that would take time, and the results might not show anything if the poison was rapidly eliminated from my body. Record the conversation I overheard? I didn't have a tape recorder, and phone records are viewed with suspicion in court. The key is to find evidence. Catch them red-handed or get them to confess. It required caution and patience. Qualities I'd developed over 30 years working as an engineer on complex construction projects. Gradually, the shock of what I heard was replaced by cold rage. My son wanted to kill me for money. The man I raised, taught, and loved had turned into a cold-blooded killer. It was a betrayal not only of me, but of Elizabeth's memory. She loved Nicholas dearly, proud of his successes, forgiving his mistakes. If she had known of his plans, it would have broken her heart. But Elizabeth was dead and I'm still alive. And I intend to stay alive long enough to teach my killers a lesson. They miscalculated, thinking the old man would be easy prey. At 73, I may not be as strong physically as I used to be, but my intelligence and life experience are still intact. I had a war to fight, a war against my own son and his wife, a war for my life and the right to die a natural death in my own home. I wasn't going to lose that war. Somewhere far away, the church bell rang. 3 strikes. The night was in full swing, but for me it was the beginning of a new phase of life, a stage when trust was replaced by suspicion, love by caution, family warmth by cold calculation. Tomorrow the play begins. I'll play the unsuspecting father and they'll play the caring children. But now I knew who was who in this family drama, and that knowledge gave me an advantage they didn't have. They underestimated the old man. That was their biggest mistake. The morning began with a theatrical performance. I woke up at 7:30 as usual, showered and went down to the kitchen to make breakfast. My hands shook slightly as I poured coffee into a cup, but my voice sounded calm when Nicholas and Chelsea appeared in the dining room around 8 in the morning. Good morning, Chelsea smiled wide and sincere. How did you sleep? We hope we didn't disturb you. I slept fine, I lied, spreading butter on my toast. Did you? Is the bed in the guest room comfortable? It's great. Nicholas sat down at the table and reached for the coffee pot. I hadn't slept this well in a long time. They looked rested and content, as if they'd spent the night in pleasant reverie, not planning my murder. Chelsea was especially animated, talking about how beautiful the garden looked in the morning sunlight. Nicholas nodded and added compliments about the house, the food, the hospitality. A perfect family scene, a loving son and his caring wife visiting his elderly father. No outsider would suspect anything wrong with this picture. The time to take my morning medication approached inexorably. At 9:30, I got up from the table and made my way to the cupboard where the medicine cabinet was kept. Nicholas watched me carefully, trying not to show interest. It's time for my blood pressure pills, I announced, pulling out a familiar packet. Dad, maybe we should reconsider the dosage, Nicholas suggested with ostentatious concern. You've been looking a little tired lately. The doctor says it's fine. I shook out one capsule into my palm. The little white pill I'd been taking every day for years now. Now it had become a murder weapon. I brought it to my mouth but didn't swallow it. Instead, I tucked it under my tongue, swallowed some water, and made a swallowing motion. Good for you, Chelsea nodded approvingly. Regular medication is important at your age. I returned to the table, continuing to eat my breakfast. The capsule slowly dissolved under my tongue, leaving a bitter taste. I had to get rid of it as soon as possible, without swallowing the contents. By the way, Dad, Nicholas sipped his coffee. We were thinking of staying another day or two. If you don't mind. Of course I don't mind, I said, moving the capsule discreetly behind my cheek. It's a big house. There's plenty of room. They looked at each other with a satisfied look. The extra days gave them more opportunity to monitor my medication, to keep an eye on my health. Perhaps they were planning to increase the dose of poison, as they had discussed the night before. Wonderful. Chelsea clapped her hands together. We'll help you with the chores, keep you company. It's boring to be alone in a house this big. After breakfast, I excused myself and went upstairs to the bathroom on the second floor. I was finally able to spit the poison capsule into the sink and rinse my mouth thoroughly. The bitterness didn't go away right away. Whatever they'd put in the medicine didn't taste too good. I examined the capsule carefully under the magnifying glass. The white shell looked intact, with no visible signs of tampering. But there was clearly something else inside besides the usual blood pressure medicine. The powder was not quite the same color as before, with a grayish tint. We had to be quick and careful. I still had in my phone book the number of Dr. Henry Morgan, my old friend and university colleague. He had retired to a neighboring town, but we occasionally called each other. Henry was a good doctor and a decent man. If anyone could help me understand my situation, it was him. I went down to my office and locked the door. Nicholas and Chelsea were settled in the living room with newspapers, discussing the news. Their voices were muffled, allowing them to talk on the phone relatively freely. Henry answered after the third beep. His voice was cheerful in spite of the early hour. Ralph, what a pleasant surprise. How are you, old boy? Henry, I need your help, I said without preamble. And it's urgent. Could you come to my place tonight? What's the matter? Any health problems? Not over the phone. I'll explain everything in person. It's very important. Henry must have picked up on the tension in my voice. I'll be there in 2 hours. I'll be there in 2 hours. I have the address. One more thing, Henry. Come as if you're just visiting an old friend. I've got company. I don't want to bother them with too many questions. You got it. I'll see you later. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the wall for a moment. The first step had been taken. Now I had to wait for Henry and ask him to confirm my suspicions. If he found traces of poison in my blood, I'd have grounds to go to the police. When I returned to the living room, I found Nicholas studying the family photographs on the mantelpiece. He was particularly interested in the picture of Elizabeth and me standing outside the newly built house. Young, happy, full of hope for the future. Mom was very beautiful, he said without turning around. I remember her laughing at you trying to fix the faucet in the kitchen. She always laughed at my home experiments, I agreed. But then she was proud of the results. Chelsea looked up from her magazine. How long were you married? 48 years. We met in college and married right after graduation. True love, Chelsea said dreamily. That's rare these days. That's ironic. She was talking about love while planning to kill the man that love had made happy. Elizabeth wouldn't have believed her son was capable of such cruelty. Around 11 in the morning, a car stopped in the yard. I looked out the window and saw Henry's familiar silver sedan. My friend slowly stepped out of the car, leaning on his cane. He was 75, 2 years older than me. Someone's here, Chelsea said, coming to the window. Dr. Morgan, an old friend of mine, I explained. He must be visiting. I hadn't seen him in a while. I opened the door before Henry could ring the bell. He looked worried, but he quickly pulled himself together when he saw Nicholas and Chelsea behind me. Ralph, dear friend. He hugged me with ostentatious enthusiasm. I was driving by and thought I'd stop by. I hope I'm not intruding. So dumb, of course not. Come in and meet his son and his wife. The performances went on as usual. Henry was a charming conversationalist, asking about work, interests, future plans. Nicholas and Chelsea were clearly flattered by the attention of the famous doctor. They didn't know Henry specialized in toxicology. Ralph, why don't you show me your garden? Henry suggested after half an hour of small talk. My dear, I remember Elizabeth was very proud of the roses. I'd love to. We went out the back door into the garden. Nicholas and Chelsea stayed in the house, engrossed in the television program. As soon as we had moved a safe distance away, Henry turned to me with a serious face. What's wrong, Ralph? You don't look so good. Henry, I suspect I'm being poisoned. He stopped dead in his tracks. What? Who? Why? His son and daughter-in-law. For the inheritance. I overheard them talking last night. They're putting something in my blood pressure medication. Henry looked at me carefully, assessing my condition. What are your symptoms? I've been feeling tired the last few weeks, sometimes dizzy. I thought it was an age thing. Let me see your meds. We went back to the house. Nicholas and Chelsea were still watching TV in the living room. I walked Henry into the study and pulled out a pack of blood pressure pills. This is what I take every morning. Nicholas buys them at the pharmacy. Henry shook a few capsules out onto his palm and scrutinized them. They look okay at first glance, he murmured, but the contents could be replaced. They need to be analyzed. Can you do that? I have a portable analyzer at home. I'll keep a couple of capsules and test them tonight. He put the pills in his pocket. Now let me take a look at you. It's like a friendly visit. Henry took my blood pressure, listened to my heart, checked my pupil response. It was like a caring doctor visiting an old friend. There are signs of chronic low-dose poisoning, he whispered in my ear. Rapid pulse, slight arrhythmia, dilated pupils. If my suspicions are confirmed, you need to go to the police immediately. I have no proof other than an overheard conversation. Blood and capsule analysis will prove it. Can you come to my place tonight? Say you're going to the pharmacy or the store. I'll try. Henry stayed for another half hour, maintaining the appearance of a normal visit. He talked about his hobbies, asked about my plans, shared memories of his college days. Nicholas and Chelsea listened with polite interest, occasionally asking questions. When Henry was about to leave, he shook my hand especially firmly. Take care of yourself, old friend. And remember, health is the most important thing. I took the hint. He'd find the evidence, and then it was up to me. After Henry left, the day dragged on slowly. Nicholas and Chelsea behaved as usual, caring, attentive, ostentatiously loving. They helped with chores, cooked dinner, broke the news. Perfect kids who sacrifice weekends for their elderly father. In the evening, I announced that I was going to the drugstore to get some vitamins. Nicholas offered to go with me, but I declined, citing the need to walk. The doctor says to move more, I explained. Walking is good for the heart. I stayed at Henry's for an hour. The results of the analysis were beyond my wildest expectations. The capsules contain digitalis, a cardiac glycoside that in small doses is used as a medicine, but in larger doses, it's a deadly poison. They add it little by little so as not to arouse suspicion, Henry explained. Another month of this treatment and your heart will fail. Death will look natural. And the blood work? Confirms chronic poisoning. Levels of digitalis 3 times the therapeutic dose. Henry printed out the lab results and handed them to me. That's enough for the police. Call right away. I arrived home around 8 in the evening. Nicholas and Chelsea greeted me with concern. "You've been gone a long time," Nicholas said. We were worried. "I stopped by Henry's for tea," I lied. "It's been a long time since we've had a heart-to-heart." "It's nice to have friends," Chelsea smiled. "Companionship is important in old age." They didn't even realize their plan had been discovered. They continued to play the role of caring relatives, preparing for tomorrow when they'd put poison in my medication again. At 10 p.m., when Nicholas and Chelsea went up to their room, I picked up the phone and dialed the police. "This is the front desk. My name is Ralph Lancaster. I'd like to report an attempted murder." The police arrived 20 minutes later. I watched from my office window as two cars, a regular patrol car and an unmarked detective car, drove into the yard. My heart was pounding, but the decision was final. There was no turning back. The duty operator warned that the officers would arrive without sirens so as not to attract the attention of the neighbors. That was wise. A loud police operation could frighten the suspects and cause them to destroy evidence. I opened the front door before they could call. Four men in uniform and plain clothes stood on the threshold. The older one, a thick man in his 50s with graying hair, showed his ID. "Detective Daniel Harris, Norton Police Department. Are you Mr. Lancaster?" "Yes, come in, please." They walked down the hall, taking off their jackets. Two stayed near the entrance. Detective Harris and his partner, a young woman with intelligent eyes, headed into the office with me. "Detective Sarah Benton," she introduced herself. "Tell me what's going on." I closed the office door and gestured for them to sit down. There were voices outside the wall. Nicholas and Chelsea were coming downstairs, attracted by the sounds in the house. "My son and his wife are trying to poison me for the inheritance," I said bluntly. "I have proof." Detective Harris pulled out a notebook. "Start at the beginning. When did you first suspect something was wrong?" I recounted last night's visit, the strange behavior, the overheard conversation. The detectives listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Sarah Benton was particularly interested in details: exact time, verbatim phrases, circumstances. "Oh, and these are the test results." I handed them the papers from Henry. "Digitalis in the blood and in the drugs. Lethal dosage if accumulated." Detective Harris scrutinized the documents. "Is Dr. Morgan your primary care physician?" "No, an old friend. Retired physician, toxicology specialist. I went to him when I suspected poisoning." "Where are the suspects now?" "Upstairs in the guest bedroom. They stayed the night." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Nicholas's voice sounded concerned. "Dad, are you all right?" We heard voices. "I'll be right out," I answered. Detective Benton nodded to her colleague. They got up from their chairs, checked for handcuffs. Harris opened the office door. Nicholas and Chelsea were standing in the hallway in bathrobes and house slippers. When they saw the police officers, they were confused. Chelsea instinctively took a step back. What's going on?" Nicholas muttered. "Nicholas Lancaster and Chelsea Lancaster. You are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder," Detective Harris announced. "You have the right to remain silent." "There must be some mistake," Chelsea exclaimed. "Attempted murder of whom?" "The attempted murder of Ralph Lancaster by poisoning." Nicholas turned as pale as chalk. His eyes darted between the policeman and me as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "Dad, what did you tell them?" He sounded desperate and angry. "The truth," I answered calmly. "What I overheard last night." Detective Benton handcuffed Chelsea, who struggled and protested. "This is absurd. We love Dad. We care about him. He's old, he's sick, he's paranoid." "Save the explanations for the interrogation," Harris advised, shackling Nicholas. "Read your rights first." He read them the standard wording about the right to silence and an attorney. Nicholas listened as if in a fog. Chelsea continued to be indignant in an innocent voice. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding." She turned to me with a pleading look in her eyes. "Mr. Lancaster, tell them we're good kids. We came to take care of you." What an actress. Even in handcuffs, she tried to play the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, resentful of unfair suspicion. "Hold on. Where do you keep Mr. Lancaster's medication?" Detective Benton asked. "In the cafeteria," I answered. "Top shelf on the right. One of the uniforms went to look for evidence. Came back with a pack of blood pressure pills and some other meds." That's all there was. We'll need to take samples for forensics, Harris explained. We'll also need your medical records and additional blood tests. Of course. I'll get you everything you need. Meanwhile, Nicholas had found his speech. Dad, you don't know what you're doing. His voice was shaking. We would never hurt you. You're our father. I heard your conversation last night, I said, looking into his eyes. Every word. About the powder and the pills, about the dosage, about the 2 months until natural death. Nicholas closed his eyes as if he'd physically felt the blow. Chelsea stopped protesting and fell silent. Their plan had been fully revealed. Where did you store the poison? Detective Benton asked. Silence. Nicholas and Chelsea looked at each other, but didn't dare answer. We'll find it, Harris promised. We'll get a search warrant for your apartment tomorrow morning. They were led out to the cars. Nicholas looked back at the door, his face a mixture of guilt, horror, and incomprehension. Perhaps it was only now that he realized the gravity of the situation. Chelsea walked with her head held high, playing the innocent victim of circumstance. Mr. Lancaster, Detective Benton stayed with me. You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow for a detailed statement. You'll also need a medical examination at the hospital. I'm willing to cooperate with anything. Do you have any relatives or friends who can stay with you today? After this kind of stress, you shouldn't be alone. I thought about Dr. Morgan, but I figured I could handle it on my own. You don't need to. I feel fine. Goodbye then. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the police station. The cars drove off, taking my son and his wife. The house fell into silence again, but now it was not oppressive, but soothing. The danger was over. I went into the living room and poured myself whiskey. My hands were no longer shaking, and my heartbeat had normalized. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The poison was out of my system. The threat to my life was gone. Nicholas and Chelsea's things were left in the guest bedroom. The police will take them as evidence tomorrow. There may be traces of digitalis among the clothes and makeup. I went upstairs and went into their room. The bed was neatly made, personal belongings stacked on the bedside table. Nicholas had always been a pedantic man. Even as a child, he'd put his toys away. This habit had persisted into adulthood. Chelsea's notebook was on the table. I flipped through it, looking for clues. Most of the entries were work-related. Client phone numbers, dates of appointments, financial calculations. But one page revealed some interesting information. Digitalis, 15 milligrams daily. Accumulation over 8 weeks. Symptoms of heart failure. Below that were funeral cost estimates, estate appraisals, loan repayment plans. A cold, business-like approach to killing a relative. No emotion, just numbers and facts. I tore out the page and tucked it in my pocket. One more piece of evidence for the court. In the bathroom among Chelsea's cosmetics was a small jar labeled skin vitamins. I opened it and found a white powder. Apparently, digitalis was stored here, disguised as a harmless supplement. Tomorrow, this jar will be sent to the police lab. Forensics would confirm the contents, and the case against Nicholas and Chelsea would be irrefutable. I went back to my bedroom and got into bed. For the first time in days, I fell asleep without dreading my morning medication. No one was going to poison me anymore. The house was a safe haven again, not a trap. Elizabeth would have been shocked by what was happening. She loved Nicholas unconditionally, forgiving him for all his mistakes and shortcomings. To learn that her son planned to kill his father would have been a blow to her. But Elizabeth also had a strong sense of justice. She would have supported my decision to go to the police. Family is not only about blood ties, but also about moral obligations. When those obligations are violated for money, the family ceases to exist. All that remains is a biological bond devoid of love and respect. Nicholas chose money over his father. Now he will receive just punishment for his choice. The court will decide how many years in prison the son who tried to kill his parent deserves. I will not interfere in that process, ask for leniency or a reduced sentence. Justice is more important than kinship, especially when relatives turn into murderers. The next 3 days passed in a series of interrogations, medical examinations, and meetings with detectives. I testified at the police station, took additional blood tests at the hospital, answered endless questions from the prosecutor. Each time I had to retell the story from my first suspicions to the nighttime conversation to the call to the police. Detective Harris was a seasoned professional who approached the case with the methodicality of a good engineer. He checked every detail, comparing facts, building logical chains. His partner, Sarah Benton, specialized in family crimes and understood the psychology of such cases. Siarna. Unfortunately, poisoning relatives for the sake of inheritance is more common than we'd like, she said during an interview. The victims are usually elderly people living alone. Slow-acting poisons allow killers to avoid suspicion. Thursday morning, Detective Harris called with good news. Forensics confirmed your suspicions, Mr. Lancaster. Your medication contained digitalis at 5 times the therapeutic dose. If taken regularly, such a concentration would cause cardiac arrest within 6 to 8 weeks. I squeezed the receiver of the phone. 6 weeks, that's how long Nicholas and Chelsea had given me. What about the search of their apartment? They found a whole lab. Pure digitalis, dosage scales, empty capsules, instructions on how to make poisonous drugs. Your sister-in-law seems to have done some serious research. Where'd she get that kind of knowledge? It's coming out. So far, we know she's been ordering specialized literature off the internet, toxicology books, chemical reference books, even a forensic manual. She was thorough. Chelsea's methodical nature was surprising and frightening at the same time. She didn't act spontaneously, driven by sudden greed. The plan was months in the making, every detail thought out in advance. That made her even more dangerous. Can I come down to the station? I'd like to get the details. Sure, I'll meet you in an hour. The Norton Police Station was located in the center of town, in a red brick building built in the early 20th century. I drove by often, but I never thought I'd one day be a key witness in a murder case. Detective Harris met me in the lobby and ushered me into his office. On the desk were folders of documents, photographs of evidence, printouts of forensic results. The case against Nicholas and Chelsea was getting more and more detailed. Have a seat, Mr. Lancaster. We have some interesting information about the motives behind the crime. He opened one of the folders and pulled out some documents. Your son and his wife are in dire financial straits. Credit card debts, $43,000. Car loan, $28,000. The mortgage on the apartment is $150,000, with payments 3 months overdue. I shook my head. Nicholas never talked about financial problems, always playing the successful manager. That's not all, Harris continued. In March of this year, they took out a private loan against their future inheritance. $100,000 at 30% interest. The lender is not a very pleasant organization, if you know what I mean. Loan sharks? That's right. People who don't like to wait for repayment. Your son got his last warning 2 weeks ago. Now the rush made sense. Nicholas and Chelsea didn't just want their inheritance. They were facing physical violence for not paying their debts. The grim creditors had no mercy on their debtors. But the most interesting thing was discovered yesterday. Harris pulled out another document. Your son had already consulted with realtors about selling your house. 3 different agencies valued the property at $1.5 million. He showed me printouts of the emails. Nicholas asked in detail about the sales process, the timing of the paperwork, the amount of commission. The correspondence dated back to last month, long before their visit to me yesterday. Had he already chosen a buyer? I asked, studying the documents. There's a preliminary agreement with the developer, Tom Crowley. He plans to demolish your house and build a residential complex on the plot. He offered $1,200,000 for a quick deal. The house Elizabeth and I spent 40 years building was going to become construction waste. Nicholas wasn't just selling real estate, he was selling family history, memories, a piece of his parents' soul. Crowley get a building permit yet? Filed the paperwork with the mayor's office a month ago? Your son must have assured him the property would soon change hands. The details added up to an ugly picture. Nicholas wasn't just planning my murder. He'd already allocated the money, negotiated the sale, gotten the official permits. The only obstacle was me, an overly healthy and stubborn old man who refused to die in time. What about the suspects themselves? Any confessions? Not yet. Nicholas claims he was trying to help you with your meds, accidentally mixed up the dosage. Chelsea claims she doesn't know what she's talking about. They both want lawyers and deny murder. Do they have any chance of getting away with it? Harris shook his head. Extremely slim. The evidence is overwhelming, poisoned drugs, correspondence with realtors, debts as a motive for the crime, plus your testimony about the overheard conversation. A good prosecutor would have enough for a conviction. He closed the files and put them in the safe. The trial is likely to take place in 2 to 3 months. Until then, the suspects will remain in custody. They won't get bail because the charges are too serious. I left the station with a heavy heart. Justice would be served and the killers would be punished, but it was no joy. Nicholas was still my son, despite his crimes. Elizabeth carried him under her heart, taught him to walk, read him bedtime stories. Now that child sat in a jail cell, charged with the attempted murder of his father. At home, there was an emptiness waiting for me. Huge rooms, silent furniture, silence that used to be soothing but now pressed on my soul. I wandered the hallways, looking at family photos. Here's Nicholas at 3 years old, laughing on the swings in the garden. Here he is in his school uniform, proudly holding his elementary school diploma. Here's the university graduation. Elizabeth and I hugging our son, rejoicing in his success. When did everything change? At what point did a loving child turn into a cynical killer? Maybe the problem was me. I pampered him too much, didn't teach him to appreciate what he had. Or was Chelsea's influence stronger than his parenting? Dr. Morgan called this evening. "See, Ralph, how are you? I read in the papers about your son's arrest. I'm handling it. Thanks for your help with the tests." "You're welcome. How are you feeling? Is your body recovering from the poisoning?" "Little by little. The fatigue's gone. The dizziness has stopped. The doctor says there won't be any traces of digitalis in your blood in a month." "That's good. How's your morale holding up?" I've been thinking about the question. Physically, recovery was going well, but my mental state left much to be desired. It's hard to realize my own son wanted to kill me. All my life, I thought I knew him well. People change, Ralph. Not always for the better. It's not your fault what happened. Maybe not, but you still feel guilty. It's normal. You're a father. You love your son no matter what. But don't forget, he committed a crime. A serious crime against you personally. After talking to Henry, I feel a little better. Friends are people who support you in times of need. Don't judge you, don't give you advice. They just stick around when needed. I ate dinner alone, watched the news on TV, and read a few pages of a detective novel. The usual evening routine that used to seem boring. Now it had taken on a special value. I could enjoy simple pleasures without fearing for my life. Tomorrow I have to go to the prosecutor's office again to testify again. Nicholas's and Chelsea's lawyers were trying to find weaknesses in the prosecution's case, to challenge the results of the forensic tests, to question my competence. Standard defense tactics in hopeless cases. But there was too much evidence to refute. Poisoned drugs, plans to sell the house, overheard conversations, confessions in Chelsea's notebook. Not even the most talented lawyer could explain away these facts with an innocent mistake. Nicholas and Chelsea will get what they deserve, years in prison for attempted murder. Maybe it'll be good for them. Time to reflect on their mistakes, reevaluate their priorities. Although I doubted Chelsea was capable of remorse, she'd planned my murder with the cold calculation of a professional killer. People like that rarely change for the better. Nicholas, on the other hand, might have come to his senses. Deep down, he was still the boy who cried over a dead dog. It was just greed and his wife's influence that dulled his conscience. A few years in prison might have brought him back to his true values. That's not my problem, though. I did what I could. I saved my own life and ensured that justice was served. Nicholas's fate depended solely on himself. The trial began on a cold February day. The Norton County Courthouse looked solemn and somber at the same time. The gray columns, the tall windows, the austere lines of 19th century architecture. I walked up the steps, feeling the weight of the ordeal ahead of me. For the first time in my life, I was to testify against my own son. The courtroom was full. Journalists occupied the front rows, and locals came to see the high-profile case. The story of the poisoning of an elderly father for an inheritance had captured the attention of the whole town. Newspapers wrote about the cynicism of today's youth. Television showed stories about family values. I took a seat in the witness row and saw Nicholas for the first time in 3 months. His son sat at the defendant's table next to his lawyer, slimmed down, gaunt, in a cheap suit. His imprisonment had changed him. His self-confidence was gone, his manners stiff. He looked like a man who'd realized life was over. Chelsea held herself differently. She sat up straight, listened attentively to the prosecutor, occasionally jotting something down in her notebook. Her lawyer was an expensive specialist from the capital. Apparently, her banker parents had spared no expense for their daughter's defense. But even the best lawyer could not change the obvious facts. Judge Margaret Stone was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a stern look. She had worked in the court system for 30 years and had a reputation as a fair but tough jurist. She was particularly attentive to cases involving family offenses. This is a case involving Nicholas Lancaster and Chelsea Lancaster on charges of attempted aggravated murder, the judge announced. Prosecutor, please state the charge. Assistant District Attorney James Adams was a young but experienced lawyer. He gave a clear and coherent account of the crime, from the financial motives to the specific acts of poisoning. Every fact was supported by documents, every assertion by expert testimony. The defendants methodically poisoned a 73-year-old man with digitalis for several weeks, and the prosecutor said. The goal was simple: to receive an inheritance of $1.5 million. They expected the death to appear natural, related to the victim's age. The defense tried to portray the case as a misunderstanding. Nicholas's lawyer argued that his client wanted to help his father with his medication, but accidentally mixed up the dosage. Chelsea's lawyer insisted on her innocence, as if she knew nothing about her husband's plans. But the evidence said otherwise. A toxicology expert explained to the jury that such an amount of digitalis could not have gotten into the medication by accident. Detective Harris described the findings in the defendant's apartment: scales, empty capsules, instructions for making poisons. Bank records showed the couple's critical financial situation. On the second day of the trial, I was called in. Mr. Ralph Lancaster, come up to the witness stand, the bailiff announced. I walked across the hall feeling dozens of stares. Nicholas looked at me with a pleading look in his eyes, as if he was hoping to the last minute that my father would change his mind and refuse to testify. Chelsea studied the papers with a look of complete indifference. The oath on the Bible, the promise to tell the truth and only the truth. Words spoken by millions of people in American courts. For me, they had a special meaning. I swore to tell the truth about my own son. Mr. Lancaster, tell the court the events of the night you overheard the defendants talking, asked Prosecutor Adams. I slowly and in detail recounted the night's dialogue between Nicholas and Chelsea. Every phrase, every intonation. The courtroom listened with rapt attention. Jurors took notes. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. They were talking about the powder in my blood pressure pills, I said. Oh, no, Chelsea said that at the current dosage, I had 2 or 3 months to live. Increasing the amount would cut that time in half. How were you feeling during that period? The prosecutor asked. Fatigue, dizziness, palpitations. I put it down to age. Didn't suspect poisoning. What made you seek Dr. Morgan's help? An overheard conversation. It became clear my life was in danger. The prosecutor asked questions methodically, building a logical chain of events. I answered honestly, without embellishing the facts or hiding details. The truth was on my side. Then the cross-examination began. Nicholas's lawyer tried to question my memory, hinted at age-related mental changes. Mr. Lancaster, you are 73 years old. Could you have misinterpreted what you heard? Perhaps the defendants were discussing something else. I heard every word distinctly, I answered firmly. My memory's excellent. My hearing, too. They were planning my murder. But you love your son, don't you? Are you capable of accusing him of such a terrible crime without 100% certainty? It was a painful question, but I prepared for it. I love my son. That's why I can't let him become a murderer. If I didn't say anything, he'd go through with the plan and suffer a lifetime of remorse. Chelsea's lawyer had a different tactic. He tried to paint my daughter-in-law as a victim of circumstance. Mr. Lancaster, wasn't your sister-in-law caring and attentive? Didn't she help you around the house? She played the part of a caring daughter-in-law, I replied. But in reality, she planned my murder for money. Do you have evidence of her direct involvement in the crime? She organized the whole plan. In her notebook were found calculations of the dosage of poison. There was digitalis in her makeup bag. The interrogation lasted 2 hours. The lawyers tried to find contradictions in my testimony, to force me to admit doubts or inaccuracies. But I had prepared for the trial thoroughly, reconstructed every detail. Their attacks collapsed into facts. As I left the witness stand, Nicholas tried to catch my eye. His eyes were pleading, desperate, a last hope for a father's forgiveness. I looked at him calmly without anger, but also without pity. He had made a choice. Now he had to take responsibility. Dr. Morgan, Detective Harris, the forensics experts testified next. Each new witness added a brick to the prosecution's wall. The defense looked increasingly helpless. On the third day of the trial, the defendants themselves took the stand. Nicholas stepped up to the podium, pale and confused. "I never meant to hurt my father," he said in a trembling voice. "Yes, we had financial problems. Yes, I thought about the inheritance. But to kill, I'm not a murderer." "Then explain to the court how digitalis got into your father's medication," the prosecutor asked. "It was a mistake. I was trying to help him with the pills and I mixed up the drugs. They found a whole poison lab in your house. Was that a mistake too?" Nicholas stopped talking. The lie was too obvious to be sustained. Chelsea held more confidence. She denied all the accusations, claimed she knew nothing of her husband's plans. "I loved my father-in-law like my own father," she declared. "I would never hurt him. If Nicholas was planning something, he kept it from me." "Explain why your notebook contains calculations of digitalis dosages?" the prosecutor asked. "I was researching a topic for an advertising campaign for a medical drug. It was a job, nothing more." The lie sounded unconvincing. The entries in the notebook were specifically about my poisoning, not an abstract advertisement. The arguments took all day. The prosecutor demanded the maximum penalty for a particularly cynical crime. The defense asked for leniency, referring to the absence of previous convictions, the youth of the defendants, their remorse. "The defendants planned the cold-blooded murder of a defenseless elderly man," said Prosecutor Adams. "The motive was self-serving, $1.5 million inheritance. They acted methodically, calculatingly, without a shadow of a doubt. Such people are dangerous to society and should be isolated for years." Defense attorneys painted a different picture. A young couple cornered by debt made a mistake under the pressure of circumstances. Nicholas is a loving son who could never follow through with the plan. Chelsea is a victim of male ambition, an unwitting participant in the crime. The jury retired for deliberations on Thursday afternoon. I waited for the verdict in the courtroom, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee from a vending machine. Journalists tried to interview me, but I refused to comment on what was happening. It was for the court to decide, not the press. 4 hours later, the jury returned. The forewoman, an elderly woman in an austere suit, read out the verdict in a measured voice. In the case of Nicholas Lancaster, guilty of attempted aggravated murder. In the case of Chelsea Lancaster, guilty of attempted aggravated murder and organizing criminal activity. The hall murmured. Nicholas dropped his head onto his hands. Chelsea clenched her fists. Their attorneys looked over with sour faces. The defense had failed completely. Judge Stone scheduled sentencing for next week. Until then, the defendants remained in custody without bail. The case was moving toward its logical conclusion. As I left the courthouse, I felt a strange emptiness. Justice had been served. The criminals would be punished. My life was out of danger. But there was no joy. In its place was the heavy realization that the family had ceased to exist. My son was a stranger. The bond between us severed forever. Elizabeth would have understood my decision. She always said that truth trumps comfort, justice trumps family ties. But it would have hurt her to see the family we'd spent a lifetime building fall apart. That evening at home, I opened a bottle of good whiskey and drank to my wife's memory, to her wisdom, her kindness, her ability to distinguish between good and evil. If she were alive, Nicholas would never have committed the crime. A mother's love would have stopped him before the poison got into my pills. But Elizabeth wasn't around, so I handled the situation myself. Protected my own life, punished the killers, brought justice. Now I could move on with my life without looking back. Sentencing took place on Friday, March 10th. Nicholas received 15 years in prison. Chelsea, 18 years as the organizer of the crime. Judge Stone read the sentence in a monotone voice. but every word hit my heart like a hammer on an anvil. My son will spend the best years of his life behind bars. When he's released, he'll be 52, an age at which it's hard to start life over. Chelsea will be out at 43. Maybe she'd still have a chance at happiness, though I doubted it. After the verdict was announced, Nicholas turned around and looked at me one last time. There was no more pleading or hope in his eyes, just the desolation of a man who had lost everything. The prison guards led him away in handcuffs, and I realized I would never see my son as a free man again. Chelsea held on until the end. She walked toward the exit with her head held high, as if the awarding of a long prison sentence was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Her banker parents sat pale as chalk in the audience, but their daughter didn't dignify them with a glance. Even in defeat, she remained selfish and emotionless. Journalists tried to interview me on the court steps, but I refused to comment on the verdict. What was there to say? Justice had been served. The criminals got what they deserved. The story ended the way it should have. Detective Harris approached me in the parking lot. "Mr. Lancaster, the case is closed. I wanted to thank you for your courage and integrity. Not everyone could testify against their own son." "I did what I had to do," I replied. "Nothing more. Shuri Koni, if you need help, call me. I have contacts for psychologists who specialize in family trauma." Psychologists. People of the modern world think that any problem can be solved by talking to professionals, but some wounds are too deep for therapy. My son's betrayal is just such a wound. At home, I was greeted by the usual silence. Large empty rooms, furniture that remembered better days, pictures of a happy family on the mantelpiece. But now that family existed only in the past. The present belonged to me alone. I went into the study and pulled out of the safe a will drawn up 10 years ago. The document was simple. All property went to Nicholas as sole heir. Warm words about a loving son who would carry on the family tradition and preserve the family nest. It's ironic. The son did want the inheritance, but not for preservation, but for sale. The house was to become construction debris, the lot a site for a housing development. 40 years of family history would be turned into square meters of standard apartments. I tore up the old will and threw the scraps into the fireplace. The flames greedily consumed the paper, leaving only ashes. Symbolically, and for my illusions of family love too, only ashes remained. I made a new will for 3 days, carefully thinking over each point. The house and the land plot went to the Children's Charitable Foundation, New Hope. The organization was dedicated to helping orphans and children from disadvantaged families. Let the villa become a shelter for those who really need a home. Antiques and family heirlooms bequeathed to the Norton Historical Museum. 18th century porcelain, paintings, antique clocks, all were to remain in the town where Elizabeth and I lived our best years. Visitors to the museum would be able to admire beautiful things, not sell them to pay off debts. The bank accounts were divided among several charitable organizations. The Foundation for the Elderly received $100,000. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, $75,000. Norton Library, $50,000 to buy new books. Nicholas received nothing. Not a dollar, not a family portrait, not his father's forgiveness. He had made a choice between money and family, chose money. Now he would have neither. The will was notarized by Robert Clark, a notary I'd known for 20 years. He didn't ask too many questions, but his eyes were understanding. After the trial, the whole story became public. People understood my motives. "A wise decision, Mr. Lancaster," he said, stamping the document. "The money should go to those who deserve it." Spring came early that year. Already in mid-March, the daffodils bloomed in the garden. The first leaves appeared on the oak tree. Nature was renewing itself, beginning a new cycle of life. I, too, decided to renew my life. Mrs. Parker came more often, 4 times a week instead of 2. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept me company at dinner. A kind woman in her 60s who understood the value of simple human companionship. "Mr. Lancaster, why don't you get a dog?" she suggested one day. It would make the house more cheerful. It seemed like a reasonable idea. I went to the animal shelter and picked out a 5-year-old golden retriever named Baxter. His previous owners had given him up because they were moving to another city. The dog was smart, calm, well-mannered. Baxter quickly got used to the new house. He slept by the fireplace in the living room, accompanied me on walks in the garden, welcomed me with joyful barking when I returned from the store. The house was full of life again, only now it was an honest, loyal life without secret agendas or selfish calculations. Dr. Morgan became a frequent visitor. We spent evenings at the chessboard discussing books, politics, memories of our youth. Old friends appreciate a friendship that has been tested over the years without trying to gain anything. "How are you feeling?" he asked after every visit. "Fine. Better than in years." It was true. Dizziness and fatigue were gone. Blood pressure normalized, sleep improved. The body was cleansed of digitalis and the soul of family illusions. It turned out to be much easier to live without false hopes. Neighbors treated me with sympathy and understanding. The story of poisoning by my own son shook the whole neighborhood, but no one condemned my choice. On the contrary, people admired the courage of a 73-year-old man who was not afraid to confront the killers. Mrs. Chester from the house next door brought homemade cookies and the latest news. Mr. Davidson was helping with fence repairs. A young couple from across the street invited us over for a weekend barbecue. It turned out that neighbors could be a much better family than blood relatives. By summer, I had fully adapted to my new life. Days were filled with simple pleasures: reading, gardening, taking walks with Baxter. Elizabeth always said that happiness is made up of little things: a cup of morning coffee, a good book, a sunset in the garden. Now I realized how right she was. Sometimes I thought of Nicholas. I wondered how he was coping with prison life. Does he repent for what he's done, or does he blame his father for his problems? He probably expected me to visit him, to give him packages, to ask for clemency, but that didn't happen and never will. Some bridges can't be rebuilt after they've been burned. Trust is a fragile thing that cannot be repaired. Nicholas lost my trust forever when he decided to poison his father for money. Chelsea came to mind sometimes too. The woman who planned my murder with the cold calculation of a professional hitman. She got the punishment she deserved, but it wasn't satisfying. Revenge is an empty feeling that doesn't bring back what's lost. In August, I received a letter from the director of the New Hope Orphanage. He thanked me for bequeathing the house and offered to meet to discuss the future use of the building. "We plan to house 20 children here from 6 to 16, Director Michael Turner told me over tea in the living room. "The large rooms are ideal for bedrooms and playrooms. The garden will become a place for sports activities." I like the idea. The house would once again be filled with children's voices, laughter, joy. Elizabeth would approve of such a decision. She has always loved children, dreamed of a big family. "When do you plan to open?" I asked. "A year after receiving the inheritance. I need to renovate, install additional furniture, get licenses. Then I have time to enjoy the house one last time, to live another year among my favorite things, surrounded by memories of a happy life with Elizabeth." The fall was warm and sunny. The leaves on the oak tree were gradually turning yellow, creating a beautiful carpet in the garden. Baxter loved to run through the fallen leaves, tossing them with his paws. Simple doggy happiness that had an infectious effect on those around him. In the evenings, I sat by the fireplace with a book and a glass of whiskey. Baxter lay at my feet, quietly sniffling. Outside the window was the garden where Elizabeth and I had spent so many happy hours. Soon that peace would be disturbed by the bustle of children, but for now I could enjoy the silence. Life had a new meaning, not to accumulate wealth for ungrateful heirs, but to do good to those who deserve it. The orphanage would get a beautiful home. The museum will be enriched with antiques. Charitable foundations will be able to help more people in need. Money should serve people, not turn people into murderers. Nicholas and Chelsea forgot this simple truth and paid for their freedom. Their story will be a lesson to others. Family ties are easily broken when it comes to big money. In December, the first snow fell. I stood at the office window watching the white flakes cover the garden. Winter is a time of rest and reflection. The year was coming to an end that had brought so many challenges and revelations. I had lived 73 years, built a house, raised a son, loved a wife. I have faced betrayal and found the strength to respond with dignity. I will spend the rest of my life at peace with myself, not burdened with illusions of family love. Some people die surrounded by a large family, others die alone. It's not the number of relatives at the bedside that matters, but the quality of life lived. I can be satisfied with my choices. Justice has been served, good has triumphed over evil, and money will go to those who deserve it. Elizabeth would be proud of me.